Chris isn't here.
Yeah, Chris and Richard Bernard said he'd try to make it, but he might be a little late. Is Alma?
She went with her somewhere. That's
Well,
not fair because she's on the program.
That's right, Alma's on the program. She didn't know it till about a half hour ago.
Well, that's it's all fixed then.
Otherwise she'd jump ship there.
Well, that's one way to have them turn turtle and run.
Well, I would sort of like Alma here when here she comes. No, this is David and her. I wanted to introduce Alma to you as well as Frank.
Who's holding up the works?
Well, you ought to rig up an air compressor and steam whistle out there too.
Yeah.
You blow it twice for assembly and once for
Okay. Okay, I guess we'll have to start without Alma and introduce her later.
You got what's different.
Well, we're very fortunate to have Frank Hicks, a native of Estes Park, marry Alma Otley, who was a native of Philadelphia, because that brings the otherwise Colorado folks into this part of the country twice a year, and we see more of them than we would if they were always in Estes Park. But Alma's family had property on the Bohemia River about less than 30 miles from here, and so Frank and Alma still have a place down there, and they spend some time in the spring and some time in the fall on the Bohemia. So this is one of those times. A lot of you fellas know Frank. He's been to Hagley at least twice with his car, and another time to help us get our cars over there last year. And some of you don't. In fact, some of you I have just met for the first time here tonight, and I'm not sure that most in the group know you, so I wonder if you folks would introduce yourselves before I turn it over to Frank. I think you're in the last row there, most of you.
Okay. Michael Downs, worked at Hagley, and my wife Juanita, and my uncle John Reese.
Good. Oh, so you're all connected with Hagley. Well, we're certainly glad you could come. We're glad Dan Muir's here again. Dan was here last year or this spring, I guess, when Brent Campbell spoke to us. Dan's responsible for those wonderful car meets we've had at Hagley, 3 of them now, and we've been so happy to be able to participate in those. Well, it's obvious that Frank should talk about Colorado, since, as I said, he's a native of Estes Park. And Stanley certainly had a major presence, at least F.O. Stanley did, in Estes Park and in Colorado. And I've asked Frank to speak on that tonight. Where Alma comes in this program, it turns out that she has just done quite a history of the architecture of the Stanley Hotel. Is that correct, Frank?
Well, I don't know whether she would like to use the word quite. She wrote a material for the docent tours on the architecture of the hotel. And maybe we can get her to speak about that.
Well, we thought that would be of interest too, so we're hoping she'll tell you a little about that. So Frank, Alma, we've just been talking about you.
Well, I was sent down with popcorn.
This is Alma Hicks, everybody.
Hi.
Alma's going to tell us a little about the hotel and her work in connection with the docents there and all.
I thought you were kidding about that.
Well, I told them that you're expected to speak, and you've known it for at least a half hour.
Well, you got to work for your supper.
Frank, if you'd like to sit, well, you can do that. If you'd like to stand, you can do that.
I'll probably stand.
But this is Frank.
Well, I thought a good place to start would be maybe review quickly some stuff you already know and maybe you don't know it. Estes Park turned out to be a very therapeutic place for F.O. Stanley when he was approaching 50 years of age. He had been suffering from tuberculosis, and that's a disease we hear a little bit about today, but in those days, I've heard very high percentages of the population suffered from tuberculosis. And there were sanitariums all over upper New York State and in the Adirondacks. I don't know where else. Colorado had its share of tubercular sanitariums. And they tell a story about, what's the circus guy?
P.T. Barnum.
P.T. Barnum. He came to Denver, and he was headed for his ranch in Pueblo, and the Denver Post reporter got him in the station and was interviewing him. And he said something to the effect of, Mr. Barnum, what is your impression of Denver? And he said, well, I see so many people with sad looks on their faces on the streets of Denver. And the reporter said, why is that? And he says, well, I suspect it's because they all came here expecting to die, meaning of tuberculosis, and they haven't died yet. But that's kind of what happened to F.O. Stanley. His doctor told him, so the story goes, that he didn't have very long to live, and the one chance for him to live was to go to Denver and write his will, because he might not live past October. When he got to Denver, it didn't seem to help him much. But he had talked to a doctor in Denver. In fact, he engaged the doctor, and the doctor says, I know just the place for you. It's in a little valley, about 65 miles from Denver. It's 2,200 feet higher here than here in Denver, which puts it at 7,500 feet. And I just happen to have a cabin I'll rent you. Sounds like a deal, right? Well, he started for Estes Park, and it was a valley without access to any real good transportation. It had stagecoaches once in a while, and you could get there by foot. And he had this little 1903 Stanley put on a train and taken as far as Lyons, Colorado, and unloaded, and then he was going to fire it up. And he was promised a guide to help him get to Estes Park. And when the man who ran the stage livery there at Lyons saw this fragile little 1903 car, he said, I'm not going to risk the life of my employee in that car. So he withdrew from it, and so F.O. Stanley went on by himself. Stanley supposedly had the telegraph operator there in Lyons telegraph Estes Park, and they did have telephone lines and telegraph at that particular point in time. And telegraph said, I will be there in 3 hours, engage me a room at a lodge, and tell them to have a hot bath prepared. So Stanley took off for Estes Park up this single-lane road, had to carry his own water. Here's a man weighing 93 pounds, suffering from tuberculosis, carrying 5-gallon buckets of water and so forth. But anyway, he got there in an hour and a half. That was twice as fast as the stagecoach went. The telegraph operator didn't believe that he was going to get there at all, so he didn't bother to send the telegram. But anyway, they stayed there that summer. Flora, by the way, came by stagecoach. She didn't even trust the car to go up that road. And she had already gone up Mount Washington. So you can kind of understand she had already driven in the car up a very difficult road. Mount Washington has, what, 12% grades. We always wonder how Stanley got back down Mount Washington. We're planning a tour up, by the way, up Mount Washington hill climb next year as the 100th anniversary of that climb. And every car that goes up there has to go up with a car. There's a company that will let it back down the hill in the we still don't trust the brakes on them. But we don't know how Stanley got down. Maybe we'll research it and find it. Maybe Tom already knows, I don't. Anyway, Stanley got to Estes Park. By the end of the summer, he'd written his will, by the way, but he'd gained enough weight that Flora said to him, so it's reported that it looks like this climate agrees with you. I think we better plan to come back next year. And they did come back next year. They did acquire some land and started planning a house, which was an identical copy of the house that they had in Newton, Massachusetts, including the wallpaper and everything except the foundation. The house was built on a hill. Newton didn't build it on level ground, but not Estes Park. They found a valley there that had 200 souls living there. A few people sold eggs, a few people kept milking cows, but that was about it. There was no mining, there was no other activity there. This is the same time when there was already a railroad up Pikes Peak. And the mining of Cripple Creek and other places in Colorado had railroads, but Estes Park was a little park named for Joel Estes, who tried to raise cattle there and failed miserably at it. We always wonder why we named the valley after Joel Estes, who failed, and here was Stanley, who succeeded in most things he did, and they didn't name it after him. Anyway, his health tended to improve, so by 1906 he decided that this would be an excellent spot for a first-class hotel resort. And he started planning with an architect in Denver a resort hotel. And this hotel was to be a 100-room hotel. It turned out to be 99 rooms. I don't know what happened to the oddball room, but it didn't materialize. By the way, if you've ever seen The Shining, the last TV run, it was filmed in the Stanley Hotel. So it is today an elegant hotel. But here's a valley, no support structure, no support services, no water supply, no power supply, no sewer, no doctors, and no transportation system to get in there except by foot or stagecoach. So in planning this hotel, and I'm only going to cover the part of the mountain wagon. The mountain wagon was then conceived of by FO and discussion with FE. They designed it and built it in 1907 and tried it out in Estes Park in 1908, the year before the hotel was started. And the version of this car that they built first was called the Model Z, which lacked, it had 3 seats. It didn't have the 4 seats. It was a 30 horsepower car. It was, as best I can tell, Tom may have more on this than I do, that was the first real application for a 30 horsepower engine that needed every bit of the power that it could produce, because it was climbing in 22 miles, about 2,200 feet, so that comes out pretty close to average of 2% grade, but at places it was 10 and 15% grade before they fixed it. So they tried out the Model Z in 1908 and ran, I don't know how many they built. I see pictures that look to me like there are at least 3 different models there that summer, and they ran a little mini transportation line from Loveland and Lyons up to Estes Park and brought people to the YMCA, which is and has developed into the world's largest resort YMCA, and other hotels that were starting up. So by 1909 the hotel was done, and the hotel is Georgian architecture, kind of out of place in a rustic mountain town. And still today it's kind of out of place, although we think of it as the grand old lady of the hills. And they arrived with, Stanley brought out and they manufactured in the plant, I think, about 100 of these cars, although the record is not very clear on how many they made. I arrived at the number by kind of saying, here's how many people came to the hotel. They stayed so long. We needed to have not only people, but half of them, or a third of them anyway, carried luggage without any seats in them. and they had to bring in almost everything that was used in the hotel. When you go through all of that, and then say, and here's the kicker, how reliable a car is this? Are they in service 100% of the time, or are they only going to run 50% of the time, and they have to be fixed and retubed and whatever? That's the big guess. If they were all running perfectly, you probably could get by with 30 cars. I was having a lot of trouble with my mountain wagon at that time, so I didn't give it a very high reliability factor. But they brought the guest. The hotel opened in 1909, as I said, and to a big convention of pharmacists, and was considered quite a success after that. Over the years, however, the hotel kind of fell on hard times and has gone through a number of owners, but right today it is back on stream with some very good hotel operators that have put a lot of money back into it. Alma, would you like to comment just a few minutes on the architecture of the hotel? You can't have very much time. One paragraph.
That's all it was one page. The F.O. Stanley, their homes in Newton, Massachusetts were all this colonial revival of the Georgian style. And the Georgian style was developed during the period of King George prior to our revolution, like 1740 to 1780 in this country. Williamsburg is a little bit earlier example, but all around here there are lots of examples of it. It was characterized by, it started back in, it's a result of Roman architecture, and Palladio was the first Roman architect to publish a book on architecture, and his motifs were copied all over the world, and he was the influence for this style of architecture. That's what a Palladian window is. It's a center window with an arch and two little side lights, and almost every Georgian building, you see so many of them in Boston, had these characteristic windows, usually over the front door or in a very prominent place. If you look at Mount Vernon, on the ballroom part that was added, there's a big Palladian window on the north end of Mount Vernon. And Mount Vernon was expanded a great deal to look like a Georgian home, but it doesn't quite get there, because one of the characteristics is the symmetry and the rectangularity. And Sue Davis said, there's no such word as rectangularity. I said, well, yes, there is. Everything is in rectangles, and it's all very carefully planned, the proportions. The Stanley Hotel is an 8-shaped floor plan with a central hall, a dining wing on one end, and it's a music room and a billiard room on the other. And all the windows are perfectly symmetrical. It has characterized by cornices, overhanging cornices with heavy decorations. And I like to look at the Stanley because it was built in 1909, and when you see typical cornices, and the cornices were a remnant of Roman architecture, which was the trim on the end of the rafters that came through. So in the colonial times they just replicated that. But they had one that was called a button and box, and it was a wooden box with little wooden buttons in it pattern on it. Well, the Stanley Hotel, instead of making the little buttons, they just drilled holes. So you look up and you get the effect of the shadows of it. But
with half the labor.
Yeah, with half the work. And it has balconies and balustrades. It is a very classical looking building. And originally it was painted mustard yellow, I don't think is the term. It was a dark yellow, which was a very authentic color at that time. A lot of colonial buildings were this yellow. But it got repainted white, and it's still white, so when you drive into town, you see this big white Georgian mansion up on the hill with the mountains behind it, and it does look a little out of place, but it is a magnificent building. So that's...
Well, I thank you.
Is that enough?
Enough for the architecture.
All right.
There will be a test for the The reason that the mountain wagons were chosen, and it turned out they worked so well, was kind of the exact reason why the Stanley twins chose steam in the first place. There was no gasoline technology at that date that would work in the mountains. There were no real good plug clutches, there were no real good transmissions. The technology of gasoline did not really come of age until you were approaching World War II. So they had the torque, and the experiments that were run in 1908 in driving the cars up the hill proved two things to the Stanleys, or FO Stanley, that they would work well in the mountains. That there were drivers could be trained and could drive and not beat the cars up too badly. He did learn that he needed to have a car with one more seat to make the loads come out. So he built the four-seater until the period. Where's your mountain wagon, Tom?
In the other building.
Oh, okay. Well, you've all seen Tom's car with the extra seat on the back, which was built, that was a 1916?
15.
Now, there's an interesting story that is referred to in one of FO's writings, but not detailed to make what I'm going to tell you absolutely provable. But he knew that these cars could carry these loads up the hill in about 4 hours, even though he'd made it much faster in the 1903 car, that you had a lot of bumps and the roads were really bad. So FO made a trade-off that he said, I need so many cars to haul so many people, I'm going to have to add at least 4 more cars to my fleet, or I'm going to have to put some money in the road so we can cut down the travel time. Now, this is system engineering thinking, if I ever saw it, although we didn't use those words in those days, or they didn't. And he decided to invest and improve the road from Loveland to Estes Park, and partially the one from Lyons to Estes Park, so they could cut down the travel time, so they didn't have to add so many cars. I don't see any record of any of the 5-seat versions ever operating in Colorado, but I don't know where he built that car of yours for. But anyway, they were 30 horsepower cars, and what evidence I have is that they were geared rather low for the hills, and they obviously couldn't go very fast because the roads were so bad. They also proved that the cars, and used the cars to climb a brand new road that had been built over the pass to Grand Lake, which went up almost to 11,000 feet. And the gasoline cars at that time couldn't even get to Estes Park. The reason you invited a lot of people to go with you in a Model T was because you needed them to help push the cars up the hill. And also, the Stanley mountain wagon drivers earned a little extra money because they would stop on some of the hills and wait for some of the Model Ts to catch up to the back, and then they would hook ropes and tow them, the Model Ts, up the hill. Now, that was told to me by one of the grandchildren of the Lukinen brothers who lived in Lyons and operated there during the time period that Stanley was there. So I kind of believe that that story is possibly a correct one. Okay, since you've all seen Tom's car and this car, other than the extra seat, the other difference was that all these early cars had wooden frames, just like all the early Stanleys. And those wooden frames appeared to hold up pretty well. And they actually had smaller water tanks than what most people operate them on today, because the Stanley figured that he had a water stop every 10 miles or more often. So he needed to only carry that much water and didn't want to waste the energy in hauling extra water around. And besides, his passengers needed, I call them bush stops, pit stops, or there are some pictures I've got on postcards where it shows, not explained, but just shows women walking down the road from the car and men walking up the hill from the car, and the driver is filling the car with water, and I wonder what they were doing. Let's see. In 1918, Stanley sold his interest in the hotel. He sold it to a family that had connections with a white motor car company, and they replaced all of the Stanley steamers with what were called white mountain wagons. They were gasoline-powered vehicles using the technology that the white motor car company supplied vehicles for the World War I. And those cars were operated right up until 1930, when those cars were replaced by a bus called the Flexible Flyer Bus, Flexi Bus out of Ohio. But I would like to answer questions. I've given you some of kind of a overview. What might I answer? Yeah.
Would the car that he initially took there have been geared different than an East Coast car?
We have no reason to believe it was any other than the car that he had been driving around Newton. And it was 1903, and it was built for 1903, so I think it was. You guys have driven the Stanleys enough to know, even with the higher ratios, they go uphill darn well.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the guy was telling me yesterday down in Maryland, he'd been to some of the tractor pulls that they have around here. Maybe you've gone to them. And he said after the regular tractor pulls, one guy had a steam tractor and he wanted to check it out on a tractor pull and see how he made out with the other tractors. And this was a one-cylinder tractor, and the steam tractor with one cylinder and less than 100 pounds pressure walked away faster than any of the other gas-driven cars. So there's a lot of power in this stuff.
Do they have a service center of any kind? Any evidence of that out there to service all of these vehicles? And a specialized team to work on them or whatever?
Well, I'll tell you what I know, and then I guess from that point on. The hotel, the campus of the hotel, has the main hotel. Was there? Did you pass around a picture of the hotel?
Yeah, it's probably going around.
Has everybody seen it? I still have it.
I just want to see how much it shows. Aha. It shows some of the campus. There are 4 buildings on the campus. The main hotel, the Manor House, which has about 35 rooms in it. Right now it has 39. A music hall down here. The Stanleys were very much involved in music. And by the way, that music hall apparently is scaled acoustically after the Boston Music Hall. In fact, it's kind of apparent to me in everything the Stanleys did. They looked around and read and took every information they could on architecture and steam engine. Musically, their houses have very excellent music rooms, and this hotel has an excellent music hall, and we are now, the town folks are in the process of renovating that music hall and bringing it back up to performing quality standards with all the codes and everything. Now down here, in answer to your question, is a carriage house. It's always been called a carriage house, and I believe it was called carriage house because they were always horseless carriages. And it wasn't until 1912 or 13 that the lexicon of automobile and cars began to creep in over horseless carriage. Now, a car sounds a lot simpler than a horseless carriage, so why not use a simpler term? But that carriage house had the capacity to house about 35 cars, square foot wise, and leave enough room around it to do work on it. And that we know. And we suspect that that's where a lot of the work was done. Now, the terminal that was used in Loveland had some spare space for work to be done, and so did the space in Lyons. We don't really have any good evidence of what they really did. There is some tall tales around Estes Park that when the Stanleys Stanley sold the bus line, and they took them out of existence, and they needed some fill for around one of the buildings in downtown Estes Park. They took all the old Stanley boilers and engines and everything and dumped them in for fill, and that they're supposedly still there. If they are, they've been underwater all this time, and probably not worth even playing with. I gave up the idea of going and rescuing them. In fact, there's also another dump that's supposed to have some Stanleys in it, and the lady who owns the property has threatened to shoot me if I go out there and start digging. It's more fun to dig in the literature and find out where I can get a Stanley, I guess. But anyway, in answer to your question, that's where it appears they did the work. And but other than that, there are no written records.
What keeps the place going today? I mean, that whole area, people that are there, I mean, businesses moved in.
Well, the hotel is still operating. The hotel is operating year-round, and it is doing very well. And this whole campus is apparently doing quite well financially. The town of Estes Park now has a population of about 10,000.
In the valley.
Pardon, in the valley. But in the summertime, we have housing for summer tourists that appears to be in excess of 50,000. We do know that we have going through this town every year through the Rocky Mountain National Park, which is right next to the town, over 3.5 million people. It is a destination and pass-through tourist resort, and that's what keeps the place working. Just a few comments. Stanley, every time I say Stanley, I mean F.O. Stanley, because I lived with the idea that there was nobody else in the family except F.O. all through my childhood. It was a shock to me to learn that he had a twin brother. In fact, it was kind of interesting. Have you heard of Carlton Stanley? F.E.'s son? After F.O. died, Carlton Stanley came to Estes Park to settle the estate, and the town turned out and gave him to recognize F.O. Stanley, and the mayor of the town, in addressing Carlton, couldn't even bring himself to acknowledge that there was an F.E. Stanley, his father, had anything to do with the Stanley steamers. We're kind of biased out there, and I'm almost to the point where I have people understanding that there were 2 Stanleys plus 5 other siblings, plus a mother and father, and so forth. But, that's what keeps it going. Rocky Mountain National Park, the mountains, the scenery. For many, many years, the characteristic of tourism was to come to the valley and stay 2 or 3 weeks, if not the summer, to get away from the heat. This place is air conditioned naturally. It always is 50 to 55 degrees at night. Good sleeping weather. That's more than you wanted to know. Your eyes are glazing over.
Frank, you touched on the fact that F.O. built his home before he built the hotel. And it's still there, right?
Yes.
You showed it to us one time. And it's almost, or the hotel was almost an enlargement of his home, is that right?
Yeah. The home is Georgian architecture, and Stanley, F.O. Stanley, and F.E.'s home are pretty much alike in Newton. And their needle on record on architecture seems to always come out Georgian every time it goes around. But the home is built in kind of the H fashion that Alma described. It has the same kind of staircase coming down the center of the house. It's an excellent staircase in the house and in the hotel and the manor house for weddings to have the bride come down the staircase. In fact, the hotel has probably about 24 weddings a week all summer long. usually with the brides coming down the staircase, photo ops and all of that. And when you go out on the front porch, you've got the panorama of the Front Range, the Longs Peak, and all these high mountains.
Are there many steam cars in Estes Park today?
There are 6. I have 4 of them. The Stanley Hotel has one in the lobby which they treat as an artifact. It's a 1906 Model EX, and it does run. I run it. In fact, I've driven it down the causeway, so to speak, at 60 miles an hour, and I thought Alma was going to jump out of the car. But we have one in the hotel, which is a 1908 EX, and
In the museum.
in the museum. I'm sorry, what did I say?
Hotel.
In the museum, in our Estes Park Area Historical Museum. The town ended up raising enough money to buy that from one of the owners of the hotel when it went through one of its many bankruptcies and saved the fire for the town. So the town owns that particular car. And I have a 1919 7-passenger. I have a 1916 Roadster, which did you see the picture that was taken of us at Hershey? Pass that around.
Oh, no, I didn't.
I have a 1913 mountain wagon, which I own jointly with another gentleman, Judge Painter. He and I have operated a Stanley Steam Tour company and taken people for rides for quite a few years. And I think the novelty is wearing off. Our number of passengers every year keeps going down. So I plotted the curve and said, now's the time to get out of the business. I think we'll put it to rest for a while. And then I just bought a 1912 Model 63 10-horsepower car, which I'm putting back together again. It had been taken apart, should never been taken apart, but it's got to go back together. I guess I'm the guy to do it. I don't know.
Any idea of what the ratio of mountain wagons with seats versus ones that just hauled material for the hotel and luggage?
Well, this is a backward calculation because I can't find any records, but when you look at what people traveled with in those days, well, they traveled with steamer trunks, I think very appropriate to haul on the Stanley steamer. They were cases about so big, when you put one per person, you end up with the fact you probably can haul 3 mountain wagon loads of people, baggage in one mountain wagon. And I say probably. I have seen one picture, and that's the only picture I have found, of a baggage wagon parked in Drake, Colorado. It's midway between Loveland and Estes Park, with several mountain wagons rigged for people around it. And this luggage was so damn high it looked like the car would be top heavy. It's one that didn't tumble over into the river. But they got a lot of mileage, a lot of capacity out of those wagons.
But I'd think that they'd have to haul an awful lot of materials and supplies and stuff for the hotel also, as well as just the people's personal.
And I think you're right. And I have not tried to make that kind of a calculation on how much food they would have to haul and stuff like that. But if I judge by the number of food trucks that come into that hotel right now every day, you would probably say at least 3 of the mountain wagons were carrying food, making 2 trips a day, which was apparently kind of common.
Mm-hmm.
They had their own pig farm.
Well, that's true. They had their own chicken farm and they had their own pig farm. So they took all the garbage from the hotel out to the pig farm, raised the pork, and fed it back to the people.
Frank, you also mentioned there were no utilities in Estes Park when FO went there and got the idea for the hotel. tell us a little bit about the electric plant and his water supply and things like that.
Okay, I mentioned when I first started talking that there was no support services. I hope I don't upset the table. I'm sitting on. So what he decided to do was to make the hotel an all-electric hotel. This was brand new technology in that time period. And he hired some consulting engineers in Denver to design a hydro plant and design the dam, and he built and he erected the dam and put the power plant in place in the summer of 1908, so it was ready to go in 1909. And this hydro plant was to and did generate power for everything in the hotel, which included the cooking. He had electric heaters in all the bathrooms in the main hotel. He had hot water boilers in the laundry that made the steam and the hot water for washing. Everything operated off electricity. And it was about a 356 kilowatt hydro turbine. And the only problem they had, which it took them a long while to cure and never really did, was that they kept running out of water. So they would turn on the power plant to cook supper. At the time the evening dance and music was going to take place, they would light the building with candles and with other lamps and turn off the power plant and build up water until the morning when the cook came in and said, I need power for breakfast. They'd turn the power plant back on again and go through the day that way. It was an off and on situation. If any of you know about electric generators, AC generators, today they're run very regular. We keep time. 60 cycle clocks are run right off the power plant. There was no way of running electric clocks in that town. The generator kind of ran fast some days and ran slow other days. They rebuilt the dam. They blew out the penstock one year. They had to put a new penstock in. It's kind of interesting. The penstock they originally put in was a steel pipe. It was a 350-foot drop, so there's a fair amount of pressure coming into that turbine. And the pipe failed, and so they replaced it with a wooden pipe. That may shock some of you, but wooden pipe technology turned out to be a very reliable pipe. And they made it like a barrel, and they wound wire around like a barrel hoop. And at the top, they could space the wire maybe 4 inches apart. By the time they got down to the power plant, the wire was almost solid on the wood pipe. That pipe lasted them a good long time until they rebuilt the dam and put in a second hydro turbine, which was a 675 kilowatt turbine. And they needed more water, so they had to put in a bigger pipe, and so they went back to steel again. And that steel pipe stayed in there until the infamous Long Lake flood, which blew out the dam and everything, and now the power plant sits idle. And some of us are trying to raise money to restore the power plant as a historic site. Back to Stanley and services in Estes Park. He needed a bank. He founded a bank in 1907 for the hotel purposes and the guests. And approaching 1916, 17, Stanley hired my father to be a teller in the bank. And that's how my family got connected with or got to know Stanley. Stanley brought in 2 doctors into Estes Park. We built a water system to distribute water. He built a sewer system. He gave the town a large plot of property for public entertainment, which was said to be used for rodeos, horse shows, and other activities generally appropriate to the lifestyle of the West, as long as it's used for that purpose and not going into bonded or going into debt. The town could keep it if they ever tried to use it to float a bond issue. The Stanley family could go back and get it. We almost lost it to the Stanley family, 4 years ago or 5 years ago, when they thought they were going to float a bond issue for a horse arena on the property, and up rose the Stanley family and
I'll be darned.
told them they were still alive.
How do you finance all this? Strictly from the car business?
Well, let's go back a little bit further in the Stanley history. Are you aware that he, FO and FE were involved in a photographic business?
I figured that money went to build the business. I didn't figure it was that.
Big.
Well, I've been studying this and studying it along with other people, and I think we generally believe that the money in the car business was kind of equal up until about 1903, and then when FO went to Colorado, he began to take some of his share and start plowing it into the hotel. And we could only judge this to be true by reading the letters of FE's wife. What's her name?
Augusta.
Augusta has some bitter things to say about what FO was squandering his money on. And you have to really study all of this because there's not a real good story on it. We're trying to put some logic to it. I'll just digress for a minute. In Estes Park, the Stanley Museum trustees have gone into joint venture with an author, Jim Pickering, who is a retired president of University of Texas, Houston, who has undertaken and has now completed the first draft of a manuscript on F.O. Stanley's impact in Estes Park. And I think we're going to have that documented pretty well. The Stanley Museum has a fair documentation of FE and the car business and the photographic business, but not yet reduced to a book. You have to almost get the Stanley Museum newsletters and accumulate them, and over time you can read the various published articles. You know, my folly at the moment, and I say that because I'm not sure how it's going to come out, is the trustees of the museum have somehow got me in a corner and beat on me till I gave in and said I will help put together a group of people to write a story of the Stanley automobile. And I'm at the point where I've got an outline and I'm pleading with Tom for help and I'm pleading for other people for help, and we're going to see how well we do. But, you know, time is going on, and some of us who've been with it are getting older, and I think it's time we got some of these things straightened out, because if we don't, then we're handing off to people like you to try and do it, and it gets further removed. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Bob, I guess I would say that it's doubtful that F.O. Stanley or any of that generation of Stanleys ever borrowed any money. They probably, as Frank says, financed that Estes Park enterprise out of the profits, probably a lot more from the dry plate business than from the automobile business. But Ray Stanley, who was F.E.'s son, only son, and he was kind of a surprise because both his father and mother were 45 when he was born. But he was therefore lived till recently. He died in 1985. And I had the opportunity to talk to Ray on several occasions in the last 5 years of his life and got a lot of wonderful stories. But as far as what they made out of the photographic dry plate business, he told me that each one of them routinely took $200,000 out of the business every year. And that went on for about 20 years, from the 1880s till They sold out the Eastman in 1904. Well, that doesn't sound like you get rich in a hurry, but remember, no income tax, 200,000 a year, probably be 4 million a year today. And they became very well off. And,
I guess I just never envisioned that the photographic plate side of it was that big. And kind of always figured that maybe they took everything they had from photographic and put it into the starting up and getting going in the car business.
well, they did put some in, of course, and they probably never made a whole lot out of the automobile business. I think they had a good time at it, especially FE. Well, both of them did, but I don't know how much money they ever made out of it.
There were some interesting stories that you could buy a Stanley provided you paid cash, provided you came to the factory with a tie on, and you didn't ask for an instruction manual. Now, I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of the stories that wander around Estes Park.
Another story was that a man came in and had some interest in buying a Stanley, and he was at the factory, and he said, well, I'd like to own one, but I don't know how I could ever learn to operate something like this. And the answer was, then let your wife do it. She can boil water on the stove.
Well, I think it's interesting. I know only 2 women who drive steam cars, Sue Davis and Sue Keith. And they both do very, very well at it. And there are stories of women who operate Stanleys in Estes Park, and one of them, of course, you always hear about the bad things. One woman was asked by her husband, she was with child, and he says, what would you like after the baby is born? A baby carriage, whatever they call them, prams, or what else? She said, I want a Stanley steamer. And so she got a Stanley steamer and apparently drove it up and down the valley quite often. Another woman who drove a Stanley around Estes Park, who was a little more notorious in an unfortunate way, is she had a habit of forgetting which way the car was going and pressing the pedals in the wrong way, and she drove a Stanley through the post office one day.
Going forward or backwards?
She was going, the geography of the site, that I looked at that and I said it had to be going forward. I have had problems with pulling up to a stoplight and still having the Stanley in hookup, and that was one in the days when I was first learning to drive and deciding I was going to dig out from that stoplight faster than the car next to me. And damn if the damn car didn't go backwards away from the stoplight.
A few of us have experienced that in this.
I'm sure you have. It only has to happen to you a couple times until you get used to just automatically checking it.
Frank, you mentioned about your mountain wagon operation there, and you said you're phasing it out, but you had a regular sightseeing license or whatever was required there to carry passengers in Estes Park, and for a good many years, and that must have been a very interesting operation.
Well, the state of Colorado isn't too unlike a lot of states, which if you take passengers for hire, it comes under a purview of something the state has put in, like in Colorado, Public Utilities Commission. You have to get certified before the PUC and get your car inspected and all of that. And they do this for bus lines and taxi cabs and everything. So we had our annual inspection, and I think it turned out that the guy who inspected our mountain wagon always loved to come up to Estes Park and
It's a state boiler.
well, and then we had one other one which, because we had a PUC license, we needed to have the state boiler inspector come and inspect the boiler. This was always a challenge to him because on the boilers he normally inspects, he can look in the inspection holes, he can do all of these strange things. When it came to the Stanley boiler, he took one look at it and says, I don't even know what to do. So every year he would come up and look at the car and say, I think it looks good. Go out before and go home. I had the we had the steam tour in Maryland. You remember when the state boiler inspector came to that
I
tour?
did, yeah.
And he was, I thought he was going to shut down the tour because he didn't have boiler license, but every car had an out-of-state license, so he finally had to go home and with his tail between his legs. But that was always a real ritual. I'm going to miss that ritual.
But tell how the zoning kind of shuts you down too. That was kind of a sad thing.
Well, zoning is everywhere. I happen to live in an area that is like Alma's on the planning commission, so
I didn't shut it down.
I kind of think she tried to. E-estate, which says thou shalt not, with a whole bunch of things, but one of which is run an occupation of the following kinds that have employees, etc., out of your home. Because your neighbors are living in this residential area and don't like all the things attendant to businesses being operated. I also had a kerosene tank beside the garage to keep the car filled up. So this one neighbor got a little cantankerous and he started going down to the town hall. And so the first thing the town did was write me a letter and say, I need a permit for the kerosene tank. That was nice. I go down there and ask for the form for the permit. They said, we never have issued a permit before, so we don't know how to do that. Then we read further, and probably I concluded that's a battle I'm going to lose anyhow, so I'll just give in on that and take the kerosene tank out. The next thing they came back with was I had two drivers that would come in and take the mountain wagon out at different times, so their cars were parked beside the garage, which clearly was in violation of the code. And so we went through a public hearing and everything. They told me that I can continue storing my mountain wagon on the property, but if I'm going to have employees, I got to take it out personally every day and drive it across the street and turn the car over to them. Oh, okay, we can do that. A little more difficult, but those are the kinds of things that I was visible. I was right out there where everybody could see me, and if the town didn't do something about me, then the electrician up the road, the plumber down the road, the carpenters who had these guys kept saying, well, you let Frank Hicks operate up there. And my wife's on the planning commission. I better get legal. So you got to go along with it. Is that what, you have some other thing that I didn't say?
No, it's all very interesting.
Well,
Well, Tom, you were saying about they never went into debt. We have, our house is on property that F.O. Stanley owned, and we have, in Colorado, they have abstracts, these little leather-bound books where every time a property changed hands, they record it. So we kept those. And on this one property where Frank has a steamer garage, it was owned by Flora Stanley. Most of the property real estate was in her name. And it would be sold at a tax sale. And then FO would buy it back again. And then it would be put back in her name. And then it would be sold at another tax sale. So I have a feeling when he needed cash, he'd let it go and then he'd buy it back. The only time it was alive, because it went back and forth all the time. It's very interesting to look at those abstracts.
F.O. Stanley, one of the many things he did in Estes Park and it's going to make it relevant to the story, was that he purchased a large tract of land along with another gentleman in partnership called Sanborn, about 6,600 and some odd acres, which was most of the main floor of the valley. Now, by the way, in Colorado, a mountain valley is called a park. It's not a zoo, it's not something else, it's not here. So Estes Park was this big valley. The town is inside of it. He went into the real estate business, developer, and he sold lots. And like a lot of developers, they think lots are going to sell fast, I think, and they didn't sell as fast as they sold. F.O. Stanley was very much a benefactor of what, Hebron College?
In Maine,
He
yeah.
bought,
Yeah.
he bought an academy.
Academy. And the museum has a number of letters written back and forth between F.O. and the headmaster of the college. Every time they got into financial trouble, they'd write Stanley and ask to bail them out. It would appear that when that happened, Stanley would write letters back and say, can you hold on just a little bit longer? I expect the sale of a couple pieces of property, and when I do, I will send you the money. So one might think that while they didn't borrow money, they ran pretty close to the best sometimes. Eventually, Sanborn and Stanley divided and went separate ways, particularly when Sanborn died, the estate didn't want to cooperate, so they took some land and went one way, and F.O. kept the other side of town, and so forth. But anyway, those abstracts are very meaningful in trying to track the ups and downs of their finances, I think, if one wants to do that.
Well, Sue Davis is due here in 3 weeks to speak to us, and I'm sure she will touch on the Stanley Museum operation in Estes Park. But Alma, if you had something to do with this docent program at the hotel, that might be of interest to our
Well,
group.
I don't really. I just was asked to.
She helps out every time, kicking and screaming,
Yeah.
because she's not only a town planner,
No.
but she also is very involved with Smith College and other things.
But-
But we have put together a museum in Estes Park in the basement of the hotel, lower level of the hotel, I'm sorry. At the request of the hotel management and in cooperation with the trustees of the Stanley Museum. And we have exhibits there, and we do run tours of the hotel for summer guests, and we're able to raise a fair amount of money from the tours and from the gift shop. And that's an extension of the Stanley Museum, and Sue will tell you about it, but it is an attempt to interpret F.O. Stanley's place in Estes Park. And as we get the book published that I mentioned earlier, it will become more meaningful. And we have a dream, some of us do, that we'll be able to eventually take over the carriage house that I mentioned and use that as museum. Now, some of the owners of the hotel at one time expressed strong interest in our doing it. At the moment, they are showing restraint because they want to get the music hall finished before some other fundraising activity is going in parallel. You know, how much money can you raise in a valley of 10,000 people? Music hall needs about 1.4 million. Now, if any of you want to contribute 1.3 million, we've already raised it.
Yes, but tell them what you got for the power plant, though.
Well, yeah, this is interesting. The power plant is owned by the town, and we applied for a matching grant to plan the restoration of the power plant from Colorado Historic Apparently it's interesting. They have a lot of money to restore power plants. They don't have much funds to restore music halls, but a lot of money to restore power plants. I think that's fine. So we just got 45,000, and the town has a matching 25,000 with it. So this is just to draw the drawings, do the engineering work on the soil stabilization on one side, and go again to apply for the grant to do it. Now, this kind of makes some of the other folks in town a little bit upset because they think music is more important than an old power plant. So I kind of play it low key and just go about doing it.
Frank, could I ask a question about steamers in 1998 in Colorado? They already asked how many were in Estes Park, and you told them. But Frank was involved in running 2 tours, Frank and Alma, this year in Colorado, one in Estes Park in June and one in the southwestern part of the state in September, which Ruth and I were fortunate enough to be on. And but Frank drives his Stanley in these elevations all the time. He drives from 7,500 feet where he lives up over Trail Ridge Road to Grand Lake, I guess. I don't know where you go on the other side, but going up to 11,000, or is it 12,000 up there?
Well, it's 11,215 at the high point.
And he thinks nothing of it. So are there any experiences you'd like to relate about driving Stanleys in the Rockies?
Have no fear, the power is there.
I would like to relate an experience on this last tour. We were going down the road from on the way to Chama, New Mexico, and it was a fairly straight road from Pagosa Springs, and we were going along. I said to Frank, you know, your speedometer only goes up to 70. I could see the 0. So we were going about 65 miles an hour down that road in the touring car. We didn't. And Frank said, well, you know, if you hit 70, your spirit is supposed to leave your body.
Well, that's what I was told, why speedometers were never built above 70 miles an hour for a number of years. I saw one here tonight where it only went up to 50.
Yeah.
So they got a little more daring as time went on.
But they will go at a pretty good clip.
I remember the debate at the start of World War II when we were just talking about supersonic airplanes, and there were all kinds of stories about how the spirit was going to leave the body as that airplane went through Mach 1. And nobody gives up on that. But I see no problem in operating the cars in the mountains. And then the San Juans, we studiously only invited steamers that we knew 2 things besides, we just assumed the cars would be in good shape and would know it, but they had to be experienced drivers and that they had to have hydraulic water-cooled brakes. Stanleys do very well getting up the hills. They need a little of that water cooling to get down the hills. Now, yes, you can run them in reverse, and everybody that's familiar with driving in the mountains learns how to do that. My car was the only car on the tour that didn't have water-cooled brakes because it's a 1919 condensing car. And those cars put water into the oil, put oil into the water supply, as you know, and use that water on the cooler brakes kind of makes them a little bit lubricated, which is not what you want. Brent Campbell is working on a 1916 where he's going to great lengths to put a separator on and so forth, and is putting water-cooled brakes and hydraulic brakes on that car. And I believe a good separator will probably do the trick. I have chosen not to put a separator on my car yet because I haven't had an opportunity to take the boiler out, and I don't know any way to get that separator where it has to go. unless I take the boiler out. So I'm waiting for, knock on wood, a boiler failure where I have to take the boiler out. I've got the separator. John Gould builds a very nice one. Do you have any of John's
No,
separators?
I'm interested in them, but I don't have any yet.
No, I'd like to know what he's got in it.
Uh,
Who makes the filter pack that he's got in it?
well, that information is available from Don Borden, and John Gould would be glad to tell you.
I wrote to him and he wouldn't tell me.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's a oil separator from an industrial air compressor, but I need to find the manufacturer of it. So I know what,
Now, that's
Part
not
number.
very nice of John.
yeah, especially after I bought a bunch of valves from him.
All right. Well, I wonder if the name is printed on or labeled into the end caps of those filters. When I go home to Colorado, I'll take it apart and look and see. But Don Borden might know or might be willing to give that up, but maybe that's their secret.
I talked to Don in Canada, and he's the one who told me what it was, but he didn't tell me whose it was.
You know, this hobby has not been generally that secretive. It's been very comfortable.
Bob has a 735, a year older than yours, I guess, 18, that used to belong to Marvin Clare here in Delaware.
Okay.
And he's got it all apart piece by piece, rebuilding it now, getting ready to build himself a boiler.
You're going to build it yourself?
Steel comes in tomorrow, I'm gonna drill it Saturday. Well, too.
You worked out the system for winding the wire on?
Not yet. I've seen Tom do it. So I think that's the way to do it. So.
Okay. I've done it once, and I prefer to have Don Borden do it. I'm a coward, I guess, but I only have so much room to work on.
My brother's got an automotive shop, and I've been kind of ironing up one of his.
Bays.
No, I've got one of the bays already that's heated. One of the things he uses to balance tires for truck tires, because it'll mount. Yeah, and a double set of truck tires is not light either.
Well, it's got to be able to turn the boiler and put tension on the wire and control it and wind it slow enough so you can keep track of the wire and get it to build up evenly. I'm reading a book on why buildings fall down, and in it are several chapters on why bridges fall down, and one of them has to do with the cable failures on bridges not being laid right. And that kind of convinced me that I'm glad I'm particular on how the cable is run, because I sure as heck hate to have that. Because the best I can tell in calculating the strength of the shell, about half of that load of that can blowing out is carried by the wire. Although I don't know of any recorded histories of those boilers blowing up in that fashion.
So I'm going to use 5/16 wall, and I understand the originals were a lot thinner than that.
Well, that's true. The wall steels that you're probably using have a tensile strength of what, 12,000 to 15,000 psi design strength, and piano wire has 60 to 70,000 psi. So weight-wise, we're getting a lot more strength in the hoop stresses of that boiler in using thinner sections and using more wire. But if you're going to say, that is my concern, I'm concerned about corrosion, and the corrosion is going to have to carry this boiler for 100 years, then I guess I would worry about it. But I think you're going to scorch your boiler long before that.
Yeah.
Well, you haven't lived as a Stanley driver until you've scorched at least one boiler. I have one driver who scorched a boiler 3 different times. We call him Scorch.
We have a friend in the East who scorches 2 or 3 a year. My friend Jim in Washington, D.C. He's doing a little better now. I think Yeah, maybe only 2 a year.
Well, I think that great care has to be taken in the water measuring devices, whether they're 3-tube indicators or sight gauges or the kidney gauges on condensing cars. You got to keep that, particularly the connection between the gauge and the bottom of the boiler, clean. And I don't know why it is, but I can prove to you in less than 35, 40 minutes, I can jiggle that boiler around till all the rust accumulation is right in the bottom of that connection, and I got to blow it out. I solved some of that problem by hooking up the whistle. And every time I blow the whistle, it scours that tube out. And that's worked pretty well until I lost the whistle.
You were lucky, Frank. I hooked the whistle to that water column one time, and all it would do would pull all the water from the bottom of the boiler right out the whistle.
Well, see, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to pull that water out and pull all the dirt out with it.
Just didn't sound like a whistle.
We're going to be fussy.
He's a train man too, you know.
But I fiddled around with that and got it in a particular place where, yes, it would suck the water out and the whistle, but not so much to ruin the whistle.
This is cool.
I've got the stack blower hooked to mine, so.
Well, see, on the blue car, the 1916, that's what I have. But what I found is that car's got another problem, which caused me to use the stack blower all the time, and therefore I lost the ability to really know where my water level was. Now, if the stack blower is truly something you use just once in a while, you're all right. But
Why do you need it all the time? No drag?
no, I have a situation on firebacks, fire in the tubes. And I've written an article in the Stanley newsletter on what I thought were all the reasons you would get that. And I published it and waited for responses. And the other day I was talking to some of the people that I know read it, and Howard Johnson, Dewey Johnson, says, Frank, you missed the most significant reason of fires in the tubes, because all the things you mentioned are the obvious ones that can be easily corrected, but there's persistent burners that just blow back, burn back. I said, what's that? And he went through this explanation of a Baker burner situation in which he and Howard Randall, who's president of the Stanley Museum, were working on a burner, and they took a perfectly operating fine burner and decided that they ought to shine up the surfaces of the flame holder or burner plate and the wire that they were burnishing it with, cut all of the slots from 20 thousandths wide to about 30 thousandths wide. And that burner lights back all the time. He says you've got to pay attention to the Baker burner slot width. And then I talked to several other people, and they say, well, you've got to watch on Stanley burners, which are drilled, watch the hole size, and not get them larger than drill size number 54 or 55. Now, there are several people, I think one in this audience, who says you can operate up to, what did you say, 56?
Well, the mountain wagon has 52, but they're a little on the large side. 53 is what I think is right.
So, what you're fighting is steam rate, steam performance versus firepower. Now, if any of you know the chemistry or the flame propagation characteristics, or have any books on that subject, I'd be glad to get them. I'm currently in a website search for books on that subject, and I just this afternoon found a professor at the Florida State University who teaches courses in combustion engineering and his website said he knows the answer to questions like this, so I sent him off an email and we'll see if he knows. But I'd like to be able to explain how a flame holder or the burner plate really works. On a gas stove and a furnace, and a Stanley, no matter what. Why this whole size, how it works, how it keeps the flame on top of it, and the gas underneath, which is very combustible from firing up. There's got to be work done in chemistry and flame propagation.
Yeah,
And I think the Stanley owners would be right for learning something.
I've got to prove it.
Now, what's the whole size you got?
Slots.
What's what is it?
I don't remember. I put a feeler gauge down, just cleaned some of the crap out.
Well, check that. I'd like to hear from you. You have email? Send me an email with your answer.
Are there any other questions for Frank?
I don't know what time you guys go home. Maybe you
Well,
got...
we don't get home very early. But I just thought maybe you'd rather converse with him individually, or maybe there are some more questions from the group.
What I have learned, though, is that I'm convinced that altitude, by the way, of Estes Park and so forth, do not really have a direct bearing on how the burners operate. Got to bring Estes Park back in. I know there were people who said when I first got into the hobby that when you took a cross-country tour and came to Estes Park, you were going to have to shrink your whole size and your burners down because there's less oxygen in the air, go from 60s to 63s or from 58s to 60s. I have operated both the mountain wagon and the green car and the blue car with 58s, 63s, 60s, and get no difference in performance. I think there should be a difference in performance because logic tells me if you got more fuel, you should have a hotter fire and you should have a higher steam. But I need better measurements and instrumentation. The seat of my pants is not a very good test of acceleration.
Sometimes the best way to run a Stanley, though.
All right. Well, I've told the drivers that have worked for me, you have to drive a Stanley with every sense you have. Smell, taste, hearing, seat of the pants, eyesight, everything. And you've got to read what you feel, what you hear, and always sense what is happening so you can take preventive measures, which include scorching boilers and things like that.
Frank,
Yep.
Hagley, a year ago, I asked you what the principle was of or how the 3-tube indicator worked. I knew it worked, but I couldn't understand there was enough temperature differential between the top and the bottom of that thing to make any real difference. And you explained to me how that temperature differential could occur and does occur. It may be of interest that I borrowed a infrared thermometer, one of these things you can point and laser spot, and we checked one. And what was it, Bill? It was 480 at the top and 180 at the bottom.
Something like that.
There was that much difference between the top and the bottom of that 3-tube, but it's almost unbelievable that there's that much difference.
Well, the principle of steam heat had been used this principle for a long time, that steam carries the heat, and when it keeps condensing in the cooler temperature, so you're always getting a flow of the steam into there, bringing heat into it. On the water side, there's nothing to induce the movement of that except the fact that the water is being added to the top, but you're getting a radiant cooling from the bottom. And so what you're experiencing is just the fact that steam will keep all of those pipes and tubes in the Stanley and any other situation at or very close to the temperature of the boiler. And it's because that the circulation is just happening.
Mm-hmm.
And, in fact, it's interesting to watch a sight glass sometimes. you can just sit there and watch the water run down the inside of the sight glass above the water line all the time. It just keeps running in. And that's the steam coming in and condensing. If you want proof of what I'm talking about.
No, I mean, the
Well,
thermometer.
I'm interested in your thermometer ratings, because that's part of this hobby, is we have a lot of arguments about things and very little measurements to clear up some of the arguments. A lot of these things could be settled if we just go out and get measurements and settle them. But it's, I guess, more fun to debate them.
Don't confuse me with facts.
I haven't got any anyway.
All the cars we've ever driven here have just a 3-tube indicator on it. And I take it that your cars has a dead side indicator.
Yeah.
Do you know, well, it's hard for us to, I wondered if you can actually see the level of water in the boiler, whether you can make it run more efficiently with less water in it and more steam, or the fact with the 3-tube indicator, you're kind of adding water probably at a greater rate so that there's more cold water in there all the time than if you were shutting the water off and letting it heat up and only adding water as you needed it, like with a dead side indicator.
Observable facts that I have on the condensing car that I have, the water pump cycles on and off. It's got an automatic water control in it. And when I fill the water tank, as I quite often do on the trip to flush the oil out of the tank onto the ground, it cools the water reservoir off, and then that in turn means that the water being pumped into the boiler is cooler, even though it's going through a preheater. And you can feel the loss of performance and watch the pressure tend to drop. And when the water pump turns off, you can watch, assuming I'm not changing the throttle and all these other things, you can watch the pressure just climb right back up again. To your point of running water in, I can't tell otherwise in terms of the level of the water whether the car performs any better with a full tank or a full boiler or a low boiler. I do know that common sense says when I start up a hill, and I know I'm going up a hill, I'm going to approach that hill with as full a tank of water as I can. And keep in mind that water in the boiler is at the steam temperature, so it's stored energy and it's usable. If you're low on water and you go and approach a hill, you haven't got the water to convert to steam, and you're pumping cold water into that boiler, and you're hindering your ability to generate steam for that hill. Other than that,
I just wondered if there was any noticeable difference since you've been driving a car that has that kind of an indicator on it.
Not by itself. Not by itself. I know that in terms of running it in Maryland on flat ground, in that tour Tom and I ran down there, we had a number of days when we'd run, how far was it out of Fort Lewis?
It was about 60 miles each way that
60
day.
miles each way. That green car mine, I would set everything, and I could coax the car and get it running so the condenser was running right at a peak load and everything was running. I could run that car at 55 miles an hour and hold 450 pounds pressure, and that car just hummed. And the water level stayed, it fluctuated a little bit, but that water level control was always holding it. In the mountains, I have no way of telling. I'm always going up hills, down hills. Condenser's working sometime when I'm not using the engine. It's not working when I'm using the engine. Going up the hill's too slow for the condenser to work. Are you ready to serve goodies, Tom?
I know from firing a steam locomotive, it fires a lot better, runs a lot better before they're full. If you've got it running full of water, it's a lot easier to keep it hot.
Well,
And even if the engineer pulls a lot of steam all of a sudden, it doesn't affect you that as much. If you're down low on water, it really hurts you.
well, let me add this observable piece of information. When you do calculations in thermodynamics, you're always doing it against the area of heat transferred, temperature difference across an area and so forth. You cannot transfer as much heat from the fire to steam as you can transfer from the fire to water. And so if you've got your boiler fuller, you're getting more of that heat into the water, and the other way around, your stack temperature goes up and you're just throwing away heat. And the only way to prove that is to start instrumenting your car and get thermocouples all over the place and see it.
I want to do that.
Elma, do you think you have anything else you'd like to say? Anything come to mind?
No. Well, there was just one, talking about the firebacks, there was one little incident, it was last fall, when Frank and I got back to Estes Park, he had a wedding charter, and we had forgotten that daylight saving had come. So when we got out to the church, I said I'd go with him, and we got out to church, and it was at 5 o'clock, it was getting dark, and we waited for half an hour for the wedding party to come down. We had the mountain wagon. And his routine is to take the wedding party, and it was the bride and groom and the parents of the bride and the parents of the groom, and drive down through town, then come around, go up the receptions at the Stanley Hotel. So they went through town, and they were very excited about it, and it was, everything was running fine. We went in the entrance to go up to the Stanley Hotel, and the car fired back.
Well, the burner lit.
The burner lit.
But it popped back, as it is prone to do, and then starts burning right. But you'd be surprised at the big flash of flame that appeared everywhere.
Well, see, in daylight, it's not that obvious. But in the dark, the flames were shooting up, and the bride and groom and the parents were just having
well, what do you say, shoot up? It was a microsecond, it just was gone. It's kind of like a flash gun.
I said, well, we're just having a little Stanley moment. So we got at the hotel, and they got up and said, thank you very much.
I've had enough of this story.
We really appreciate Frank and Alma coming, and thanks so much for your talk, Frank, and I'm sure you'll be happy to share some thoughts individually with the group here as we enjoy some refreshments that Ruth's preparing. Just before we do break up, I'd like to say that there's a tour route here for our picnic tour on Sunday. If the weather's favorable, we plan to do that this coming Sunday with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cars, depending on how many want to go. It's a trip of about 28 miles. And so if those who are interested might like to take one of these schedules tonight. And then I do have some updated lists here of our group. I have two new people here, Jerry Lucas and Brian Crozier, written in the bottom, and we may have other new recruits after tonight. I hope so. But for those that I haven't seen here with this group before, well, I welcome again, and we hope you enjoyed it and hope you'll come back. As I mentioned, our next lecture session, we sound pretty official when we call it lecture sessions, but Sue Davis plans to be here on November 19th, which is 3 weeks from tonight. And unfortunately, the Hickses will be back in Colorado then, so they, I'm sure, don't want to come in just for that evening.
I'll hear about it, because as soon as she leaves here, she's coming out to Colorado.
Oh, okay, good. Well, she's going from here to Carl Amesley's, I think, the next day, and then I suppose come on out. But thank you again very much, and we really appreciate it.
I invite any of them who come to Colorado and find themselves in Estes Park. plan to stop by and give me a little word of warning so that I'd have at least some fuel in the car to go.
You have to wait across the street.
You're not an employee, so
No,
I don't plan to pay you. Thank you.